Japan looks perfect. Clean, safe, futuristic, but that stability is built on three things. An 80s bubble in stocks and property, 30 years of hiding the damage and keeping failing companies alive, and a shrinking, aging population that makes the debt almost impossible to pay back. And it all starts with the fever of the 1980s, a boom so extreme it stopped being growth and became mania. Between 1986 and 1991, Japan didn't just participate in the global economy, it felt like they were buying it. The Nikkei index soared 500%. Real estate prices in Tokyo tripled. People were paying hundreds of dollars for a single melon wrapped in silk, as if money had become irrelevant, and in a way, it had. The villain of our story was born in a culture you might not know, the culture of arrogance. The Japanese elite genuinely believed they had bypassed the laws of economic physics. They thought they had invented a version of capitalism where the bust cycle simply didn't exist. At the peak, a single square meter in the Ginza district cost over $200,000. You could have covered the floor with solid gold bars, and it would have been cheaper than the dirt underneath. It was a circular firing squad of greed. Companies used their inflated stock to buy land, then used that land as collateral to borrow more money to buy more stock. It was a balloon being inflated by a jet engine. The world watched in envy. Books were written about how Japan would inevitably own every major American brand and every square inch of Manhattan. They bought the Rockefeller Center, they bought Pebble Beach. But in 1991, the engine died. The balloon didn't just pop, it shredded. The Nikkei began a terrifying slide, losing 60% of its value in months. Fortunes that took decades to build evaporated in the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. This was the end of the dream. But instead of waking up, Japan decided to take a sleeping pill. When a normal economy crashes, there is a period of creative destruction. The bad companies die, the debt is wiped clean, and new growth begins. It's like a forest fire. It's painful, but it allows new trees to reach the sun. Japan refused to let the fire burn. They chose to hide the bodies instead. By 1997, the banking system was a morgue. The world saw the face of Japan's true failure when Yamaichi Securities, one of the legendary Big Four brokerage firms, collapsed. The image of their president crying and bowing, pleading for the public to forgive him, became the symbol of a broken era. But why did it collapse? It wasn't just bad luck. It was a practice called Tobashi. Yamaichi had been hiding massive losses off their balance sheets, moving bad debt between secret accounts, like a magician moving a coin between his fingers. They were pretending to be solvent while they were hollowed out from within. When the truth came out, the government realized that if they let the banks fail, the cult of stability would be exposed as a lie. So, they performed the first act of financial alchemy. They injected 60 trillion yen of public money into the charred remains of the financial sector. They didn't fix the problem. They socialized the loss. This created a monster known as the zombie company. These are corporations that don't make enough profit to even pay the interest on their debts. They are effectively dead, but they are kept on life support by the state because the government is too terrified of the unemployment numbers that would follow their funeral. Instead of an economy of innovators, Japan became an economy of ghosts. For 30 years, growth flatlined at less than 1%. To keep the illusion alive, the government started borrowing to build bridges to nowhere, massive concrete projects that served no one but the construction companies. They were bleeding to death in a basement, but they kept buying expensive bandages with money they hadn't earned yet. In 2012, Japan got desperate. They introduced a plan called Abenomics. It was a bold, aggressive attempt to print their way back to prosperity. The Bank of Japan began buying 80 trillion yen worth of government bonds every single year. To visualize that, it's like buying every single professional sports team on the planet every single week for an entire year. They didn't just buy debt. The central bank became the largest shareholder in dozens of Japan's biggest companies. The entity that prints the money became the owner of the market. This isn't capitalism, it's a state-sponsored simulation. By March 2025, the debt hit 1.3 quadrillion yen. That is 234% of everything the country produces in a year. If a regular person owed 230% of their annual income in debt, they'd be sleeping under a bridge. But Japan has a secret, a mathematical heist. The government performs a statistical shell game. They keep the interest rates locked in the basement, near zero. Meanwhile, they let inflation push the nominal size of the economy up. If the price of everything goes up, the economy looks bigger on a spreadsheet. As long as the economy grows through inflation faster than the interest they have to pay, the debt technically shrinks without them ever paying back a single yen. But don't be fooled, no one paid the bill. The government is simply burning the value of your savings to smoke out its own creditors. It is a silent tax on every person holding a yen. Every time you buy a bowl of ramen in Tokyo and the price has gone up, you are paying the government's interest. They are stealing the public's purchasing power to pay for the mistakes of the 1980s. On paper, the debt ratio has technically retreated from its high watermark of 258% during the systemic shock of 2020. But this is a cruel trick of the light. The foundation hasn't been fixed. The currency is simply being eroded to hide the truth. You can manipulate interest rates, you can print trillion-yen notes, you can play games with spreadsheets, but you cannot print people. Japan is the oldest society in human history. 1 out of every 10 people is now over the age of 80. The population is shrinking by 800,000 people every year. That is like the entire city of Seattle vanishing every 12 months. Debt is, by definition, a claim on future labor. When a government borrows money today, it is promising that the workers of tomorrow will pay it back. But in Japan, there are no workers tomorrow. In the 2026 budget, the government is borrowing nearly 25% of its entire revenue. They are borrowing money from their children to pay for their parents' medicine. But they don't have enough children to pay the bill. It is a demographic guillotine. The zombie superpower is paralyzed. If they raise interest rates to save their currency, the interest payments on that 1.3 quadrillion debt will swallow the entire national budget. If they keep interest rates at zero, the yen collapses, and the people can no longer afford to buy food or fuel from the outside world. The company is bleeding out, and the doctors have run out of blood. If you want to see the physical proof that Japan is poorer than you think, you have to leave the neon lights of Tokyo. You have to look at the Akiya. There are over 8.5 million abandoned houses in Japan. Entire villages are turning into ghost towns. In some parts of the country, you can buy a traditional 5-bedroom home for the price of a used car, or even for free, and still no one wants them. Why? Because there is no one left to live in them. These ghost houses are the physical manifestation of the debt. They represent a wealth that has completely evaporated. In the 1980s, these homes were symbols of the Japanese dream. Today, they are liabilities that the youth refuse to inherit because they cannot afford the taxes or the upkeep on a property in a town with no future. In the cities, poverty is different, but it is a poverty of the future. The average Japanese worker hasn't seen a real raise in 30 years. The youth have become the enlightened generation. Young people who have given up on dreams of wealth, marriage, or children because they can see the math doesn't add up for them. They are living in a museum of a superpower. The high-speed trains are clean, but the passengers are shrinking. The vending machines are full, but the currency inside them is losing its soul. Japan is the canary in the coal mine for the entire Western world. We look at Japan and we see a tragedy. We see a nation that lost 3 decades, but the truth is much more uncomfortable. Japan is a mirror. The United States, the United Kingdom, China, and Europe, we are all following the Japanese path. We are all aging. We are all piling up debt to avoid the pain of a market reset. We are all addicted to the cult of stability. We are all pinning plastic leaves to a dying tree, hoping the world won't notice the roots are rotted. The zombie superpower is what happens when you decide that the truth is too expensive to face. It is a world where everything looks perfect on the surface, but the engine has been replaced by a printing press and a prayer. Japan is poorer than you think because they have traded their tomorrow to keep their yesterday alive just a little bit longer. And as we enter 2026, the cost of that trade is finally becoming clear. The yen is weak, the labor is gone, the debt is eternal. Wealth isn't a number in a bank account. It is the ability to build something new. By that metric, Japan is in a permanent twilight. They have managed to stay rich for 30 years while being fundamentally bankrupt. It is a feat of engineering and sheer willpower, but willpower cannot stop time, and it cannot stop the demographic clock. The lost decades were never about a lack of money. They were about a lack of courage. The courage to let the old system die so a new one could be born. Instead, Japan chose to build a monument to its former glory, funded by a mortgage that can never be repaid. As the sun sets over the Tokyo skyline, the question isn't whether the system will fail. The question is, what happens when we realize we've been living in the same simulation? Japan is poorer than you think, and soon the rest of us might be too. The silence of a shrinking village is louder than the noise of a booming market. In the rural heartlands of Shikoku and Kyushu, the schools are closing not because of a lack of funding, but because there are no children to fill the desks. This is the ultimate analytical truth. An economy is not a series of digits. It is a living, breathing organism. When the organism stops reproducing, the digits eventually become meaningless. Japan's debt is a claim on a workforce that no longer exists. They are counting on ghosts to pay back the quadrillions. When you see a salaryman sleeping on a subway in Tokyo, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, you aren't seeing the strength of a nation's work ethic. You are seeing the desperation of a system trying to outrun its own shadow. They work longer hours, for less pay, in a currency that buys less every year, all to maintain the illusion that the 1980s never ended. This is the psychological climax of our era. The realization that the prosperity we take for granted is often just a very well-managed decay. We look at the skyline of Shinjuku and we see power, but that power is fueled by a debt that can never be repaid. It is a skyscraper built on a foundation of quicksand. Every new bond issued by the Ministry of Finance is another layer of sand. Every yen printed by the Bank of Japan is another drop of water, making that sand even softer. The Japanese people are incredibly resilient, but even the strongest iron eventually snaps under the weight of a quadrillion yen. Human nature hates endings. We will do anything to avoid the pain of a crash, the shame of a failure, or the reality of our own decline. Japan is simply the first nation to prove that with enough technology and social cohesion, you can pretend the end isn't happening for a very, very long time. But a long time isn't forever. The bill is finally coming due, and it's not just Japan that will have to pay it. We are all living in a museum of a superpower, waiting for the lights to go out. The tragedy of Japan isn't that they failed, it's that they succeeded in surviving their own death. They became a zombie superpower because they couldn't bear to be a recovering one. As the world enters the late 2000s, the Japanese lesson is clear. You can print money, you can manipulate markets, and you can hide losses in the dark. But you cannot hide from the truth forever. Japan is poorer than you think because they gave up their future to save their pride. And in the end, that is the most expensive mistake a nation can ever make.